Well, thank you. And you do me honor by inviting me to this wonderful platform that you have created. So my subject is Bombay, a liberation. And yes, it's an eccentric personal view of Bombay and its liberation. Sea and commerce. Sea and commerce. These are the two words that define Bombay in my mind. The sea came first with the decline of the Mughal port of Surat. Bombay rose thanks to the great natural harbor and miles of deep sheltered water, perfect for big steamships of the 19th century. This led to an explosion of commerce, which brought opportunity. I came to live and work in Bombay, tall in the confidence of my 21 years, seeking opportunity, adventure, not very different reasons from the millions of young men and women, migrants who came here before me and who will come after me. I arrived on the island of Bombay just as the monsoon was leaving. The city's air was dense with wetness, and the yellow and black Fiat taxi drove me through soggy streets, bouncing carelessly over puddles. The street lights glistened on the asphalt. I dreamt that night of making whopping deals to the accompaniment of 15-foot tall waves of the Arabian Sea shattering against the rocks. I walked into my office the next morning. It was in Queen's Mansion, a rundown, still impressive, an old structure with a stone facade along tree-lined Prescott Road near Flora Fountain. I took the cage, an open, old-fashioned lift to the third floor to discover the office was a hole in the wall, a few rented rooms. My heart sank. But today I realize it was nothing to be ashamed of. It was our strength that we were small. In today's language, we were a startup, which meant little bureaucracy, a liberation of a kind. I shared a room with two other trainees who looked at me suspiciously. The best thing about my being there was my chair. It spun round and round, and this cheered me up. And I went round and round, watching the world go by. I'd need lots of cheering those first 2 days because I had got into trouble immediately. Now let me pause and go fast forward a few months later, and I'll come back. It was late one evening. I had got off the bus near my home in Colaba, near the Colaba bus stand. Two women were arguing, and they stopped me, complaining that the other was trying to usurp her spot on the sidewalk. Well, I proclaimed no one could own a sidewalk, but Munna Bai protested. She said that she'd been sleeping on this spot for the past 6 months. And ever since she'd come to the city. And this was hers, and the other woman was trying to take it away. So I was face to face, I thought, with the poverty of India, a punishment for a crime no one had committed. My own spacious PG accommodation a few hundred yards away filled me with shame. So I asked Munna Bhai, what was she doing in Bombay? Where did she come from? Wouldn't she rather be at home with her family and friends than sleeping on a pavement in a strange city? Well, her reply demolished me. Picking up a handful of soil, she said, Saab, Bombay is amazing. It is heaven. Swarg hai. I looked at her for the first time closely. She had an oval face, a straight nose, smartly rounded body that had ripened early. There was intensity in her eyes. Bombay had given her a job, she said. She ate well, she saved money, she sent it home every week to feed her family. She was free to do as she liked. Whereas in her village in Bihar, she always had to hide. She was a low caste, ceaseless prey of the upper caste men. She gave me a bold sidelong glance and I noticed her earthy physicality. There was dignity in a job, she said, even if you slept on the pavement. This was not a unique story. My colleague's wife, Sheila Patel, told me a similar story. What Munna Bhai was saying is that Bombay is a liberation. A city is in fact a liberation after the village. Ever since the city was born around 10,000 years ago, it has freed human beings. It emerged in history at the time when the first agricultural surplus took place and a farmer exchanged that surplus with his neighbor for something that he wanted in barter. Soon, people began to exchange their grain, and this farmer at the next year went out of his house and he stood out and he was open for sale. And before long, his spot on the ground became a trading post. Then Banyas came along. They bought his grain, opened shops, and so the bazaar was born. With surplus food, no longer did everyone have to toil for food. They could buy it. So arrived Brahmins, barbers, charioteers, poets, and prostitutes, all the grand occupations and services of a city that could be exchanged for food. This is the division of labor, which is a liberation for many. The first city thus came into being with banyas and bazaars. And when human beings had been hunter-gatherers, they had been in bondage to the daily toil of hunting for food. But after we discovered agriculture, we were no longer in bondage. And we were no longer, everyone had to toil in the field, growing food. The city had liberated us. So, since that time, no son of a peasant wants to be a peasant. Everyone who lives in a city is called a citizen. From the word city comes civic and civilized. A civilized person is supposed to show concern for his fellow citizens. And from this act of kindness, of civic kindness, is born civilization. The city loosens the barrier of prejudice, of caste, religion, of feudal status. And this is why Munabai wanted to be in a city, a part of the urban proletariat. So let me now go back to where I had paused on my first day on my first job, when I had found myself on a swivel chair, much like this one that I am sitting on right now. Um, I was assigned to the sales department in my company, and at 10 o'clock, tea came around, and it was served to me on a tray with napkin and biscuits, which confirmed my status as an officer. The clerks and secretaries got pre-prepared sugary tea in a cup. No saucer, no biscuit, no napkin, no tray. Soon my boss, the sales manager, walked in. The other two trainees stood up at attention. Introducing himself, he asked with mild sarcasm if the tea was satisfactory. He was waiting for me to get up, but I left him disillusioned. The tea was fine, I said, but why did some people have to get it on a tray, not the others? He gave me a peculiar look. I must be a commie. By 11, we were at a sales training session where he told us his great mantra: memorize everything. He wanted us to memorize the price of each size of each product. He wanted us to memorize the names and telephone numbers of our major customers. He wanted us to memorize the time of our train, of all the trains on our journey cycle. After a while, feeling uncomfortable, I asked him, why memorize something which you can look up? He gave me another look. I felt sorry for him. An honest man who didn't know what he was doing. That afternoon, his secretary brought a sheet of paper on which there was a lot of writing, and he wanted me to calculate the productivity of each salesman for the whole month. And then he wanted me to take that sheet of paper to someone, to the typist in the steno pool, to have it typed and have it placed on his table that evening. Well, I went straight to the steno pool, found a pretty typist, and I taught her how to work out the percentages while typing her report. After she finished, she very proudly showed it to me and took it to the secretary of my boss. The following day, the sales manager walked into a revolution in the making. The news of my insubordinate shortcut, where I had not calculated the percentages but had asked the typist to do so, had got around. And the sales manager, fuming, walked into the office of the managing director. And he said, you know, we might have a rotten egg. And the boss, the managing director, looked puzzled. And so the sales manager says, well, he asks too many questions. He always wants to take shortcuts. So I had to be let go. That was the expression, instead of being fired. So I was in serious trouble. The news got around. And at lunchtime, I thought everybody was looking at me. I was feeling lost. But the company's South Indian accountant took pity on me. He invited me for an idli dosa lunch near Flora Fountain in a cafe. He felt I needed a lesson in corporate morality. The rasam arrived. Its pungent aroma opened our nostrils. Then came idlis served with mounds of coconut chutney. And he says, what is right is what the boss wants. He said that senior managers needed to feel comfortable, and a junior's job is to put seniors at ease. He should also keep his boss from making mistakes. Never contradict him in public. To violate these rules is a death wish. So don't ever speak out of turn in meetings, and try and make every effort to laugh at your boss's jokes. When our dosas were placed before us, the management principles were put on hold. His eyes shone as he plucked a piece, dipped it in sambar, placing it carefully into his mouth. By the time our filter coffee arrived, I was feeling deeply troubled with the accountant's dharma of hierarchy. And as we walked back to the office, the accountant farted. Perfect, I thought. He had expressed exactly how I was feeling about his motto, what is right is what the boss wants. Well, luckily I wasn't fired. The boss called me in. The managing director called me an oddball, and he had vetoed the sales manager's proposal to sack me. The next day, I went to visit our stockist, our distributor for Bombay, Jethalal Meghji, in Dhobi Talao. Seeing me depressed from these events, he felt I needed cheering up. And so he also picked up some dirt from the ground, like Munnabai, and he said, you know, in this bazaar, you can become rich beyond dreams. And he, with this mutti of earth, he told me the story of the mouse merchant, which is more inspiring than any case at Harvard Business School. And also, I think, symbolizes Bombay's liberating spirit. The hero of the mouse merchant is a poor boy. His father, having died before he was born, his mother cleans houses for a living. When he grows up, she says, son, you are destined for greatness and not to clean houses like me. So go there to that neighboring house, that big mansion. It belongs to the richest man in town. And you wait for him. So the young man did that, and he waits outside the rich man's mansion. When he sees a dead mouse in the courtyard, when the merchant appears, he asks the merchant if he could have the dead mouse. And the merchant laughs. He says, "Don't you want anything? People always want something from me." The boy says, "No, thank you." He just picks up the dead mouse and he goes to a widow in the neighborhood who has a cat, and he sells that cat food. He sells the mouse as cat food to this widow. And with the few paisa in his pocket, he goes to the bazaar, buys some chana, and makes packets of snack food with this chana, with a pitcher, with a ghada of cold water. He goes with this snack food and the water to sit under a tree at the city's crossroads. In the afternoon, loggers arrive from the forest. They put their heavy logs of wood on the ground to rest, and they sit down to rest. The young man offers each one a packet of snack food and a glass of cold water. And since they don't have any money, they each give him a log or a small log or some sticks of wood that they are carrying. And so this boy takes them to the house. He takes one log, sells it in the market, and buys more chana and makes more snack food, and goes back to the same crossroads with water and repeats what he did. And he does this every day for the next 3 months until the monsoon, the rains arrive, and the logging stops in the forest. And so the prices of wood shoot up in the timber market. And this young man starts unloading his logs, house full of logs, one by one. And pretty soon he's got enough money to buy a shop in the timber market. And his competitive advantage over his other shopkeepers are that he knows the loggers and they know him. And so they all come to him and his business thrives. He gains market share, and soon he's become successful timber merchant. But he quickly realizes that the margins in the timber market are narrow, and there's a lot more money to be made in building ships out of timber. So he finds a shipbuilder, a carpenter shipbuilder, makes him his partner, gives him capital, and together they become shipbuilding partnership, very successful again. But again, a year or so later, he finds there more money to be made in actually shipping the goods and passengers and freight across the seas than to building ships. So off he goes, and he gets a partner again who knows ships and shipping, and he becomes a shipper. He builds a successful shipping company, and now he has become the richest man in town. He goes to a jeweler and asks him to make him a mouse of solid gold. And he goes and presents it to that merchant where he had found the dead mouse. And he tells the merchant that you gave me capital you gave me that dead mouse, which became capital. And he says, I'm now giving you a return on your capital with this gold mouse. The man is startled. He's the rich merchant. And he's delighted by this story. And he gives his daughter in marriage to this young man. Well, this is the story I heard in Dhobi Talao from our distributor Jethalal Mekji. And it is the story of the liberating spirit of Bombay as well, where anything is possible. By the way, Arshia Sattar has done a wonderful translation of this 1,000-year-old Sanskrit story from the Katha Sarit Sagara. And you can find it, here's a commercial break, you can find it in the Story of Indian Business, which is a history in 14 volumes, which Penguin has issued, and I have been the general editor of that series. Now, I worked in the high noon of the License Raj, and the License Raj tried its best to kill Bombay's liberating spirit. One winter, many years later, I had been now working in the company. I've only worked one company. There was a flu epidemic all over the country. Sales of our entire line of Vicks cough and cold products shot through the roof. The factory worked overtime to keep up the demand. At the end of the season, we declared record profits. Everyone was happy, and we thought we were heroes, except the legal department. Our company secretary, with fear in his eyes, came to my room one evening. He was accompanied by two lawyers with long faces. We'd broken the law. Our sales had exceeded the production capacity authorized by our license. Remember, this was the License Raj. And the penalty could also amount to going to jail. From heroes, we'd suddenly become criminals, and a pall of gloom descended on our office. Sure enough, we got a summons from Delhi after 2 months. It was a preliminary hearing, not by a judge of the MRTP. And the managing director decided to send me with the lawyers. We arrived early at the deputy secretary's office, but we had to wait 2.5 hours before he decided to call us in. I was scared. Finally, we were ushered into a dark, paper-filled chamber. The officer was reading the newspaper, and he did not look up. And when he did, he gave us a cold look, which said that he didn't want to be disturbed. So we waited. Eventually he says, "What?" One of the lawyers handed him, lawyers are from Crawford Bailey, they handed him a copy of the summons. He glanced at it and looked up irritably. "What?" he repeated laconically. We nervously explained the background of the flu epidemic that had created so much misery in the country. This last winter, I said we had only been doing our duty, keeping the shelves stocked at pharmacies. Our products had come to the rescue of millions of mothers whose children had suffered from the flu. He stopped me. There was irritation in his voice. But you've broken the law, he said. I asked him politely, what sort of law is it that punishes someone for producing a product that benefits millions of people when they are sick? Everywhere else in the world, you are rewarded for producing for your country, for creating jobs, for economic growth. Here, we are made to feel like criminals. What, he said, you're questioning the law? No, I said, I'm merely appealing to you, to your good sense, wondering how could our country have created such a terrible, inhuman law? He thought I was being insolent, questioning the wisdom of Parliament. No, I said I was merely appealing to his common sense, his benevolent nature as a fellow citizen. He pushed his chair back, signaling the interview was over. We'd broken the law, and the law would now take its course. As I reached the door, I turned around and I asked him, how do you think our country will appear if the news got out that India has the unique distinction in punishing its people for producing for the country, for alleviating people's misery during sickness? Imagine if this story appeared in the New York Times or the London Times. Are you threatening me, sir? He thundered. No, sir, I said. I'm merely thinking how you would make a laughing stock of our Prime Minister if you pursued this line of inquiry. He gave me a venomous look. When we came out of his chamber, the lawyers were trembling. Our goose was cooked, they said. And I personally wanted to get away as far as possible from the stink of the license Raj. The deputy secretary, I felt, was ready to kill anything that breathed of some spontaneity or of human achievement. And I thought I'd rather battle a demon in hell than a bureaucrat. It was my first experience of Indira Gandhi's bizarre regime. And this, which left you worried silly if you had overproduced. That was the expression, overproduced. Those days, you may not know, but we not only had a license to produce a product, but we were told how much we could produce with what technology, with what machines, in what area of the country. In the end, the lawyers' pessimism turned out to be wrong. The government never wrote back, and they dropped it, and it dropped our case quietly. Well, as you know, India was liberated in 1991 from the license Raj. By then, we had sacrificed 2 generations to Nehru's and Indira's socialist dreams. The most to suffer was the city of Bombay, the bastion of free enterprise. And this is why many Mumbaikers say that India didn't get its independence in 1947, but in 1991. I joined the Swatantra Party to seek freedom from the chains of Nehru's socialist Raj. The irrepressible Pilu Modi invited me to his study group, which used to meet near Regal Cinema on Friday evenings on classical liberalism. I like Pilu. He used to keep referring to Nehru's mixed economy as Nehru's mixed up economy. We were an eager, motley bunch that met to discuss the theory and practice of the free market. Our group had many kinds of people, including a prince from one of the states of Gujarat, and I envied him his dashing red Standard Herald sports car. Then we had a passionate South Indian executive with a sugar company, an architect, a few lawyers, and an earnest accountant. And we'd read a selection from the great liberal writers, Hayek, Adam Smith, Locke, J.S. Mill, and we would discuss it we'd read it during the week and discussed it on Fridays and related it to what was going on in India. Sometimes Minu Masani, the general secretary of the Swatantra Party, used to drop by from his office near in the Army Navy building. He was a cold fish, unlike the warm and voluble Pilu. The only time I remember Masani warmed up was when he confessed that the name Beethoven somehow came up. And Masani confessed that he used to play the violin when he was young in a string quartet at Count Savini's house with Mehli Mehta, the father of Zubin Mehta, the famous conductor of the New York Philharmonic. Anyway, once even Rajaji, head of the party, made a cameo appearance in our study group. Pilu regaled us with irreverent gossip. He said one day, if greed is the sin of capitalism, envy is the sin of socialism. His bête noire one Friday evening was the British Labour MP who'd made the bizarre suggestion that those who work too hard ought to be taxed more because they earn too much, and they created envy and unhappiness in their neighbors. Of course, you envy people who are near your neighbors. You don't envy the Queen of England. Anyway, it's sad. That's what the party turned out to be, a short-lived experiment. The only serious attempt in India's political history to institutionalize classical liberalism. Pilu never liked to dine alone. When he was at a loose end on a Friday evening, he'd grab one of us and take us to the Willingdon Club. And one Friday, I was his chosen victim. And he knew everyone in the club, introduced me to old Parsi money, the old fogies there, he pointed out. He's gossiping, there they are, gossiping endlessly of the Gigi boys, the Petits, the Tatas. Well, there was no escaping Gigi boy, the opium trader, whose name was everywhere. I found it on hospitals, schools, colleges, trusts. Petit made his fortune speculating in cotton in the American Civil War, and later founding Bombay's first textile mill. His granddaughter married Jinnah, father of Pakistan. And Tata, of course, you know, is history itself. And when I think about these risk takers who built Bombay, whether through opium trade or cotton trade, my eyes grow misty. And I've already told you that the secret of Bombay's success was that deep natural harbor for the big ships. But actually, the real secret of Bombay's success was the rule of law. And Mariam Dosal, the historian, has described it very well in her book, quoting Gerald Ongier, who was Bombay's second governor from 1669 to 1677. He laid the foundations of the rule of law and the tolerance between the communities. And so Banyas came streaming from all over, Parsi shipbuilders, Gujarati traders, Jain shroffs, rubbing shoulders with Marwadis, Konkani Muslims, Baghdadi Jews, you have it. And suddenly the island city had become, from the late 18th century right through, it became India's most dynamic and most cosmopolitan. It was open to all. Anyone could rise to the top, unlike racist, bureaucratic Calcutta. Eventually, the merchant princes of Bombay became philanthropists and they bought respectability. My admiration for the merchant princes extends to Bombay's people. I came from the north, and so I found that Bombay's people were nicer than Delhi's people. Perhaps because Bombay's origins lay in commerce, unlike Delhi's feudal past. Trade and commerce teach you that it teach you interdependence. Everyone has a customer. Both a supplier and a customer have to be happy if the transaction has to go through. Neither can afford to lord it over the other. Even Mr. Tata has to bow before his customer. This is why Montesquieu, the French philosopher, called commerce gentle, soft, and sweet, civilizing, leading to peace away from war. Delhi, on the other hand, was always ruled by a king, now by a prime minister, plus a hierarchical bureaucracy. You have to stab a rival to get ahead in Delhi. If you didn't become CEO of your company in Bombay, well, you could go next door to your competitor and you had a chance to become a CEO. Delhi had only one CEO. Bombay had 100,000 CEOs. And this perhaps created an abundance mentality and why Bombay's people are nicer. As the days went by, I discovered Kamble, another symbol of Bombay's freedom. There were two kinds of people in our company, those who did the work and those who took the credit. There was lots of competition in the second group, the credit takers. Very few in the first group, and Kambile belonged to the first. And I instantly took a shine to him. He came as our night guard. He'd arrive at 6 p.m., looking fresh in his khaki uniform, when the rest of us were tired and worn out. He was lean and taut, with an athletic build, neatly trimmed beard. He came from a village in Maharashtra and didn't know much English. In fact, we used to laugh at the way he pronounced our company's name with a Marathi accent. But he was full of childish curiosity. He'd always be learning how things worked. He quickly picked out how to make tea and coffee. He loved the gadgets. In his rounds of security, he was happily serving everyone and anyone who wanted tea and coffee. And despite his broken English, he learned the telex machine. He learned the telex machine and began sending short messages. The same went for the switchboard. He'd be found answering the phone. Kamble, a villager, had got infected by the spirit of Bombay. He took his work seriously, but not himself seriously. He was always there, rain or shine, when the streets became the canals of Venice during the monsoons. If you needed anything after hours, the mantra was ask Kamble. You know, I have just discovered that it is 6:53. Now, I had timed my talk, I thought, and I find that I will have to cut short the lovely story of Kamble and its liberating influence, and just jump quickly to the last few paras and conclude. Um, you know, Bombay today is Mumbai. Let me quickly jump in so that people have time for a short Q&A, you know,
Sure.
afterwards.
Sure.
So as I said, Bombay today is Mumbai, not the haven of tolerance that Governor Ongier dreamt of, yet it still retains its character as a liberating city. Of course, it's the fantastic to the point of madness that it is an urban conglomeration of 20 million inhabitants, larger than the population of 150 countries. Half the world's population today, 3.6 billion people, now live in cities. With our average farm size in India down to 1.4 hectares, too tiny to make a living, urbanization is inevitable. And of course, no urbanization, no country achieved prosperity without it. Cities concentrate poverty, but they also offer the hope for escaping it. Ever since its birth, Bombay has exercised a mesmerizing hold on the Indian imagination. It offers a promise of hope, a place to realize one's talents and capabilities, to experience the cosmopolitan without the need of a passport. Of course, the city also exploits and oppresses human beings. Mulk Raj Anand, a proud Mumbaiker, showed this in plenty in his novel Coolie. Jawaharlal Nehru, the old socialist, was also ambivalent about the cities. His doubts arose from precisely the socialist belief in the exploitation of labor. Hindi films at the time in the 40s and the 50s reinforced the image of the virtuous village versus the immoral city. But Bombay is neither moral or immoral. Human beings are. At its heart, the city, Bombay, is based on the idea of exchange, as I just mentioned. It's an exchange between ordinary, self-interested people who seek to advance their interests peacefully in the marketplace. When I lived in Bombay, I used to trust and used to buy mangoes from a woman in Crawford Market, Apus mangoes during the season. Once I went to her and she said, I have exceptionally good ones, but they're expensive. Well, I bought them reluctantly and they turned out to be bad. I promptly punished her by shifting my business to her neighbor, to her competitor. And when I mentioned this to somebody, they said they had the same experience. And so some of us exchanged the same thing. And soon word of mouth spread that she was not to be trusted. And she lost market share. The point here is that there's an inbuilt morality of rewards and punishments within the market system. You don't need judges. You don't need police. In the same way, the purchase manager in our company used to get tempted to squeeze his suppliers. But he learned that if he did that and did not give a fair price to the supplier, our company, our products would suffer when the supplier delivered a substandard component or a packaging. In the same way, the market rewards companies who behave fairly with their employees. And that's why some companies consistently get first day at IITs and IIMs, because they have built this reputation for fairness. So this is what I mean by the inbuilt moral system of rewards within the market system. Something that Mr. Nehru never appreciated, of course, the Marxists did not. Munna Bhai called Bombay an amazing place. Well, this is what David Copperfield also said about London. Yes, Bombay has its slums. The movie Slumdog Millionaire brought out a certain humanity in the slum, however. Dharavi teaches us how a city grows organically. When people migrate from a village, they prefer to find a place to live in near their own, even though it may be a slum. To service their needs, Kirana shops come up, barber shops, cycle repair, mobile phone recharging vendors, all these pop up. And the strength of Dharavi is its face-to-face sociability, where human bonds of interdependence are formed with strangers. Thus, the street life is vital, but I'm sorry, it is disappearing in our metros, to the automobile, to our being enamored of American suburbs where there's no street life. And so many of our regulators of our cities, they do not allow mixed land use, where working and living coexist, where people can walk to work. They don't allow, in many cities, high-rise building like in Delhi, which is absurd in a country in short supply, and where people with the Aam Aadmi walks and cycles. Pavements and bicycles paths should be the first thought when designing a road. Anyway, coming to the end, for me, Bombay is irresistible. It is the turmoil of human freedom. As I watch the river of humanity flowing past Metro Cinema near the full majesty of Crawford Market. Filled with desire, fantasy, and pleasure, Bombay is a woman who beckons but does not yield her secrets easily. My hero in history is the statesman Pericles, who gave the best reason why he fell in love with his own city, Athens. Because this Greek statesman, he says, it is the liberating spirit of that city that awakens in its citizens' hearts the sentiment of a common humanity for one another. So again, thank you for letting me take more time than I had thought. Somehow I did a Google search to find out how many words I would be able to fit in within 50 minutes, but I have crossed it by 12 minutes.
Oh,
so
I think it was a very picturesque journey, if I may say so. It was almost like you actually took us to Queen's Mansion and to Dobitala while you were narrating those stories. And speaking of Queen's Mansion, we have a colleague of yours from Queen's Mansion who's encouraging you to go ahead and tell us the story of Mr. Kamble. And the name of your colleague is Siddharth Kak.
Okay, well, if that's the first question, I will quickly tell you what I have not told you. And the Kamble, after working for 7-8 months in the evening shift, Kamble became a legend. If you needed anything done, you said, ask Kamble. He could work the telex. He didn't know any English, but he could send telex messages. He could answer the telephone. He could work the fax machine, all the gadgets. And he went to the personnel manager and he said, look, I worked for all this time and I'm tired of working at night. Your telephone operator is going on a maternity leave. So let me be your temporary telephone operator until she comes back. And so the personnel guy says, are you crazy, Kamble? You can't speak English. We are a multinational company. We get calls from all over the world. And how will you manage? And so poor Kamble goes with a long face. But I heard through the grapevine the story. And so I went to the personnel guy and I said, look, give this guy a chance. I had seen what a legend he had become at night. And so I said, if he doesn't work out well, in a couple of days, you can get someone else. Meantime, have a backup ready. Anyway, soon Kamble was sitting at the switchboard. In those days, you were pushing those wires into the switchboard. And so Kamble is merrily answering phone. And that very evening, I got a call from Mr. Shah, R.A. Shah of Crawford Bailey, our lawyers. And he said, do you have a new EPBX system? I said, no. I said, why? He says, well, your calls are in the phone are always answered now on the second ring. And before, I used to have to wait for the fourth, fifth, sixth ring before the phone was answered. So I said, well, our EPBX system is Kamble. So I went to Kamble and I said, Kamble, why do you pick up the phone so quickly? And he says, he gave an answer that totally floored me. He said, there may be a customer on the other side. Now, I don't think many people could have given such a good answer. And he says, I don't want you to lose an order. And so this guy had this quality about him. One day he was explaining to a mother how to use Vicks Vapor Rub on her child, in Marathi. And so he infected everybody else with his enthusiasm. He's treated all his work as play. We used to have a carom board at lunchtime. Carom boards would come out and people would play carom for an hour quickly. And that's the kind of spirit that he created. And so he was very special. And my point is that we hire people for skills and we hire people for knowledge and their credentials, whether they've been to Wharton or IIT, but we should hire people for attitude. Kamble had attitude. And attitude is what real leadership is about. You can train people, you can give them skills, you can't give them attitude.
Attitude.
And I think that's really the lesson that
I'm sure a lot of people would be satisfied in hearing the end of Mr. Kamble. You mentioned, sir, about morality in business, and you also briefly hinted at humaneness. Could you expand a little more about how important humaneness is in business?
Well, it's matter of self-interest. The humaneness really, it's the idea that if you smile at a person, he'll smile back at you.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates bond between human beings, that humaneness creates. Mm. And so it's actually good strategy, not just compassion, that the exchange in the marketplace or capitalism depends on self-interest, and the self-interest of human beings results in people becoming friendly. Instead of fighting as soldiers on the battlefield, in the marketplace, you have to be friendly. Even if you're going to cheat somebody, you do it in a friendly way.
So do you reflect any time how different your career would have been if you had not started in Mumbai and started, say, in Delhi or Calcutta?
Well, probably. But I don't know if you know, but I was in business by accident. Yes. I had gone to college. My parents had wanted me to take something useful in college. I had gone to Harvard, where I got a scholarship, and I studied philosophy instead, and even Sanskrit, and of course, economics, politics, all those things. and I didn't study anything useful. And my mother found a useless son at home, and she got panicky. And so I applied for a job, and this is the company, Richardson Hindustan. They were wanting trainees, and there were 12 people in the company. That's why it was a hole in the wall in Queen's Mansion on the 3rd floor at the time.
Yes. We have somebody in the audience, Vantu Shah, who says that he wants to thank you for Golden Summer of 1991 chapter in India Unbound. And he says that is what inspired him to study development economics. And he wants to ask you if you still retain the same optimism about India that you had when writing that book.
Well, India Unbound, I predicted we had been growing at 3.5% till the 80s. From 1991 to 2020, our rate of growth went up to 7%. And population growth went down from 2.2 to 1.6%. And now, therefore, you can see how the per capita income has been rising. So right throughout this period, whether it was through the Vajpayee years or whatever, but that 7% growth has happened. Now, I think the COVID certainly slowed us down, but even before that, we had slowed down. I mean, demonetization was a mistake. The GST was not a mistake, but it caused a slowdown as well in the beginning because of the way it was designed. And the informal economy has been hurt badly. But I think still, even this government has done the reforms. I'm so glad we stuck to the farm reforms, and we have not given in. Labor reforms, IBC, this privatization of banks that has been announced, the other privatizations. I mean, I feel we will, after COVID, we are going to return back to that 7%. And that's now we'll never be China. I don't think with a democracy we'll ever go into double digits. But if we stay at 7, hopefully try for 8, I think we will realize the future. We're not a tiger, we're an elephant. Hopefully a wise elephant.
Okay. A related question comes from Ram Kumar. He wants to know, in your opinion, what are the 1 or 2 key challenges that Mumbai would face once the pandemic is behind us?
Well, let me take these things away. I fear the Shiv Sena. And frankly, I don't like the Hindutva business of the center as well. And I just hope this doesn't go out of control. But we don't have an opposition. And so I worry about our politics.
Okay.
But frankly, I also worry that we don't have, I mean, the Congress party is not a reforming party either. That period of 91, it was forced. And thank God Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh were there. But as soon, I mean, all the reforms took place. I mean, the big reforms that brought in the high growth in 2003 to 2011 were done during the Vajpayee years. When Manmohan Singh came, we expected reforms, but the left did not allow him to do any reforms. And he was Sonia Gandhi's lucky, if you know, and so the main problem is that we have not sold the reforms to our people. So we reform by stealth. People cannot tell the difference. People think, oh, reforms are about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Well, the rich do get richer, but the poor also get richer. And people don't know the difference between being pro-business and pro-market. The reality is, market is about competition. And no businessman likes competition. Every businessman is a monopolist. So businessmen don't want reforms. And so They'd much rather have a cushy sort of deal with the government. Anyway, the point here is that reforms are the answer.
Reforms
And
of the
now more than even economic reforms, the real reforms that country needs are the reforms of governance. The 4 pillars of governance. Why should it take 15 years to get justice in the courts? It's disgraceful. The number of inmates, the in trial people,
under trials.
under trials. Why is 3 or 4 out of 1 out of 3, 4 parliamentarians have a criminal record? Why should a civil servant who works 14 hours a day and does a brilliant job gets promoted on the same day as a guy who works 2 hours a day? These are the problems. Why should the police, why should I be scared to go to my police station here in Lodi colony? Why should the police be a handmaiden of the chief minister and not of the citizen, protector of the citizen? So these are the basic reforms, and all the blueprints are there. Now it will take guts for somebody to do that reform.
Put them into practice.
So we will really get our independence that we got. 1947 political independence, 1991 economic independence. We were not going to get a whole complete independence until we do the governance reforms. And then we can say that we are truly free citizens.
You mentioned independence, and there's a question from Jackie Kukreja, who is wondering whether you see in the last 5 or 10 years, whether Mumbai is moving closer to Delhi in terms of becoming more pretentious.
Well, Delhi is changing. Thanks to Gurgaon and Noida, it's become a commercial city. And a lot of investment has poured in. And so Delhi, there are parts of Delhi and the attitude that is now changing. It's no longer the bureaucratic city. It's now becoming a commercial city. Bombay, I haven't lived in it for 25 years, alas. And so almost 30 years. And so I don't know. But I've sensed that same spirit of Munna Bai or of Jethalal Meghji, who picked up that earth and told the story of the mouse merchant. I think that spirit is still alive in Bombay. That's my feeling.
You spoke about market meritocracy. So the question from Nikhil Verma is, or the observation is, that he feels scared that with the misuse of a free market liberal economic system with a maneuverable regulatory system, how do the things, how do these coexist? Can they coexist?
Yeah, no, I think you made a Nikhil, you made a very good point. The fact of the matter is that we do need a regulatory system. I mean, look at the way that some of our regulators, electricity regulators, a classic case, where the country has excess power, but the people, half the people of India don't get 24/7 power. And that's all the regulator had everything. You could open it up, had competition in the distribution. So we have the rotten state electricity boards, which are these rotten monopolies. So there are such anomalies, and we need institutions. The regulators have to help create institutions that are autonomous, that are bankable, and as other countries, and we'll also create a vibrant debt market as a result. The latest example is this railway. You know, they opened up private bidding for trains this month for railways, and nobody bid from the private sector. And the reason is that they didn't trust the regulator. They've got these old fogey regulators from the railway board, old retired fellows who find, spouting the same thing. So it is entirely the fault of the railways that they did not get it. I hope this new minister You know, we had no hope with the previous guys. But this new minister, I hope he is listening, and he will, they are already fixing the rules so that, otherwise it was all stacked in favor of the railways. And why would anybody want to run? I mean,
A private train.
I used to be on the railway, I was in the railway restructuring committee, you know, the last Bebek de Broy committee. And I wrote the chapter on privatization and why freight trains, why we needed competition. Not privatize the railways, keep that, but create competition, as we did in the case of Indian Airlines and so on, Air India.
An observation from Nikunj Harlalka. He says Mumbai airport has slipped to third position. Business based out of Bombay is struggling. Extortion cases of well-known political figures. Is there still cause to be optimistic about Bombay?
Well, you know, what's happened to your home minister, you can the stories are there and everywhere. I mean, you could find it in other places as well. I think the main concern of the citizen really should be the interface of the citizen is at the level of in Bombay, it's the level of the city, of the MCD, municipality, of the Mumbai municipality. And ideally, we should have an elected mayor, and we should have it should be an empowered mayor, not be a subsidiary of the chief minister and the Mantralaya. He should be elected mayor who should have all the power to run the city. That's the way we'll get good governance. But the states will not give up. Maharashtra won't give that power to Mumbai. It's the cow they can milk. Nevertheless, the key thing, as I said, is the interface of the citizen with the state. And that doesn't matter whether the home minister is corrupt or not. That what matters there is that now with digitization, you can apply for any permit, you can apply for licenses, even renewal of your driver's license. You can do it online. This is what's liberating the Indian, not the reforms that you need in the lower bureaucracy, which is all rotten and corrupt in most places. Mumbai has better than other places, but by God, you go to a district town in UP or Bihar, and you know what it's like.
This question about healthcare and education, where do you see India and Mumbai in that sphere, and what more can be done in these two areas?
Well, the problem with education and health, they're related. But let's begin quickly with education. The reality is that half the children today in India are in private schools. And in cities, it's over 65%. Now, why? The reason is the government schools have failed. And the reason why government schools have failed is a governance issue, that 1 out of 4 teachers does not show up. And 1 out of 2 teachers who shows up is not teaching. And so what does a poor person do? Earlier, middle class abandoned government schools 2 decades, 3 decades ago, but now in the last decade, the poor are abandoning government schools. And these budget private schools have come up where the fees are 500 to 1,000 rupees a month. And so the fact of the matter is, the private school is not an elitist school. It is serving the people. Unfortunately, the private school, why more good private schools don't come up, is because of the license Raj in education. You can't open a private school. In Delhi, you have to get 25 pieces of paper approvals. Each one requires a bribe. And the essentiality certificate, which says that school is essential, that bribe can go to 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs, whatever. So you have this problem with the schooling issue. And the fundamental thing is the government has to break the Ministry of Education into two parts. One is that runs the schools. So you don't have a conflict of interest. You run the schools separately, and a regulator who manages the whole, the private and the thing. So they don't try to kill the private fellow who is trying to do. They send their own children to a private school, but they won't. And then they try to put fees, control, etc., which of course then, anyway, health, same problem. 4 out of 10 doctors does not show up in a private health center. 1 out of 3 nurses does not show up in a private health center. And 30% of the medicines are stolen. And UP 69% stolen from a private health center, public health center. I'm talking about public government private center. But the biggest problem is we have not done the reform. The reform is like we should have followed Thailand. Thailand is a perfect model for us. In Thailand, the ministry has divided itself into 2 parts. One part manages the government hospitals, and the other part is a part that says we will, Thailand has achieved universal health care. And why? Because the government says that we will pay you for you whether you want to go to a private hospital or a public hospital. And so they give money on the basis of outcomes. The government hospital doesn't get the money automatically. If it's performing as well as a private hospital, only then it gets the money because patients want to go there. So that kind of freedom, that kind of system, I think could be what we need.
Okay. I think we have last 2 questions. There's an observation from Dipesh Karmarkar. He says that we are in this whole big post-globalization, liberalization, etc. But are we in this killing Mumbai environmentally? Are we looking after the environment in a same balanced way as we are looking at liberalization, etc.?
No, clean air
is
a serious problem. And I live in Delhi, so I can tell you that it's, right now it's wonderful. Monsoons are there and my God, it's really quite wonderful. But come October, the crop burning is going to begin, and we, of course, will then see those numbers spike up. And it's not an easy problem because it involves many ministries, it involves states here. But if there had been a will, they would have been able to do it. And they are getting their act together, though, I must say. I know for Delhi, they are getting their act together. Delhi was the first city to bring in CNG in public transport. But yes, overall, I think this latest report has confirmed that global warming is a fact. So the deniers have to be lunatics, like myself, I was many years ago. But now you have to protect the environment as well.
So as far as a bit of an unfair question, sir, if you may allow, in 2050, where should people be living, Delhi or Mumbai?
Well, it will depend on governance. And by governance, I don't mean the ministers. I don't mean the Prime Minister or the Home Minister of Maharashtra. I mean the person who needs a completion certificate for his home. He has just bought a home, he's built it, and if it requires a bribe, as it does in Delhi, I don't know about Mumbai, if it requires a big bribe, people would rather not pay that bribe, I would say. Delhi also has a head start with the metro, and it has done a fairly good job of catching up in Bombay on transport. But Bombay still has the spirit, l'esprit as the French say. And that spirit, I must tell you, Delhi does not yet have. Yes, pockets in Gurgaon and Noida do, but by and large, it is the heavy weight of bureaucracy that weighs it down. So I suspect if I was a betting person, I'd bet on Mumbai.
I think we must take this very last question. It's interesting and it's just come in. Shruti asks, what power does an ordinary citizen like me have in bringing about change in governance and environment?
Well,
what
I
would be
think,
your advice to her?
Yeah.
How she can empower herself?
Yeah, so governance, I mean, the fact about government school teachers not showing up and you're up against that lobby of school teachers. And the thing is that if voters can be vocal enough during election campaigns, at least, and even schools which have been neglected, Delhi's up government has shown that it's willing to pay attention to schools and to healthcare in this mohalla clinics and so on. And so it's possible. And I would just say it's got to, the politician has to see votes in it. That's the old public choice theory school, Buchanan said that. And really, you have to translate. So if you vote on caste lines or religious lines, then politicians will do that too. They'll just divide the country and so on. But if people clamor, I would say, and also I think I blame the reformers, because reformers should have been giving, Margaret Thatcher used to say that she spent 80% of her time selling the reforms, only 20% doing the reforms.
Implementing it.
I mean, today we are reforming by stealth. I mean, this farmer problem should not have occurred. Of course, it's not a problem because it's vested interests that are involved. And it's only a Punjab, Haryana farmer problem. It's not a national farmer problem. But nevertheless, you need to sell. And the biggest failures in this have been the reformers. Every night they should be up there with the talking heads.
Thank you so much, sir. I mean, we transgressed from a personal liberation to national liberation, so to speak. Your views on so many different topics have been most valuable. Thank you so much for your time.